Testing, testing. Yes, good. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Reuters. We're thrilled to be partnering again with the Reuters Institute for the launch now of the 13th edition of the Digital News Report. I, as many of you in this room, am a huge follower, an avid follower of the DNR. Today is always one of those days where you sort of sit back, kind of buckle in, get ready for the brace position to hear what Rasmus, Nick and team have found out about our industry and the warnings that they're going to give us. And this year they've now expanded to 47 countries. It's a really great report. I have to confess I've only got about halfway through it so far. And I warn you, it's not very comfortable reading, but important. This year we're going to hear about some significant shifts in the digital landscape, not least the changes in the platform's approach to news and the emerging challenges around artificial intelligence. We've all seen Facebook and X deprioritize news with the resulting drop in traffic to publishers' sites. And recent headlines suggest that we might be about to see exactly the same with search due to AI. In the meantime, we see a boom in the use of TikTok and YouTube for news. 2/3 of respondents now watch short news videos weekly, and over half watch long form, but not always from major publications. So what impact will these platform shifts have on publishers' outputs, on our business models or our video strategies? Now, the huge theme this year is, of course, the rise of generative AI. I speak of very little else these days. While our newsrooms work out how to use or indeed not to use Gen AI, the DNR looks at what audiences think about it and underscores the importance of human oversights, with respondents much more confident about us using AI for things like transcription than for out-and-out content creation. Human oversight is one of the 4 fundamental pillars that we at Reuters have set for our Gen AI development. Just this year, in fact, in the last few weeks, we've launched 2 tools where Gen AI does the heavy lifting and our expert editors decides what goes out and what doesn't. As we continue to experiment, we firmly believe that AI must not remotely compromise the integrity and trust our clients expect of Reuters. Amidst a record number of global elections this year, concerns about misinformation have also grown, especially on TikTok and X, where misinfo about everything from Gaza to the royal family's health has been very prevalent. But through all this, trust in the news, I guess good news is it's stable, bad news, still below COVID levels. The report shows that that trust is earned by high journalistic standards, transparency, impartiality, fairness, principles that guide all that we do here at Reuters under our Thomson Reuters Trust Principles. Reuters reaches billions of people every day, and every day we hold ourselves accountable to deliver news that is not only timely, but fact-based, fact-checked, and which reflects different perspectives. So as we delve into the DNR 24, the challenges are many. Today we'll get some valuable insights to help us to adapt to what the world looks like, and I'm sure that we'll all be inspired to make the changes because of what we hear. Now, I was given 4.5 minutes, but I've cut back my comments because there's, of course, also something else important to say, which is that this DNR is also the last to be published under Rasmus's excellent leadership of the Reuters Institute. As many of you know, Rasmus and his family will move back to Copenhagen over the summer, and we will miss him hugely here. Delighted that you have promised to stay in touch and to be part of the DNR team, but we will miss you. And you've done an incredible job doing to us what we seek to do to others, to hold us to account with fact-based, academically rigorous, globally relevant research, afflicting us as the comfortable, and challenging our tendency to groupthink and to a bit of complacency, if I'm honest. Your passion for our profession is second to none, and we thank you for everything that you've done. And with that, I hand over to Will.
Thank you. Hello, morning. Thanks, Jane. Really delighted to be here. My name is Will Church. I'm the director of the Media Freedom work at Thomson Reuters Foundation. And I echo Jane's comments, welcoming you here, and to also the global headquarters of the Thomson Reuters Foundation as well. At the Foundation, we are incredibly proud of our very long association with the University of Oxford and RASJ, which stretches way back to the launch of our Reuters Foundation Fellowship Programme back in 1983, through to the co-founding of RASJ itself in 2006, and then watching and supporting its development into the centre of excellence it has undoubtedly become since then. And this 13th edition of the Digital News Report is clear evidence of this. Its annual launch has become a seminal moment for our industry and certainly for our work at Thomson Reuters Foundation. For those of you who may not know about the Foundation, we work to strengthen free, fair and informed societies. Now, one of the main ways that we do that is by leveraging expertise in journalism and the law to advance free media globally and to promote journalism excellence. So every year we are working with hundreds and hundreds of journalists through editorial support programs. We collaborate with newsrooms worldwide to establish sustainable and efficient operations and to help them better connect with audiences through high quality journalism. And we empower at-risk media and the broader industry to address the constantly evolving threats and challenges to press freedom through a range of global programming. Now, to undertake such a range of activities at pace and at scale, it's essential that our teams can root their work in solid foundations that are based on the needs and the situation of the industry, informed by research and data, and that is where the Digital News Report has become invaluable to our work. So just a few examples. Take our substantial programming supporting media in exile. With editorial, operational and legal support from TRF, independent Russian journalists and newsrooms are thankfully finding a new life in jurisdictions across Europe. But one of their most existential challenges is how they reach and stay relevant to their audiences back home or in diaspora locations. It's vital we can provide them with the very latest and most reliable insights on how audiences are consuming news globally, and these are the insights that the report can give us. Another few examples from our newsroom development programs. The reports have identified the trend of consumers relying less and less on news publisher portals. Only 22% access their news that way now, mostly through search and aggregators and that sort of thing. I'm sure many of you in this room are concerned with strategies around audience development, and the report is invaluable for that. And then how can news publishers keep their brand distinct with all those associated editorial standards and transparency in a sea of competing digital distractions that have none? So the range and quality and richness of information in the report helps us to come up with policies and strategies to empower newsrooms operating in an array of very challenging contexts. Of course, the great unknown for many of our stakeholders and what RESJ's research is at the forefront of uncovering is the impact of AI on the profession. Everyone in this room understands some of the challenges. What we at the Foundation are now primarily concerned with is how we can support journalists to meet this moment. For us, this means over the next year, for example, we're going to be running a range of programming, working with journalists on the ethical considerations around AI and supporting them to use AI tools in the newsroom without bypassing journalistic standards. We're going to be developing regional networks of key stakeholders to improve things like knowledge sharing, better South-South collaboration, and with a view to providing a stronger voice. And no doubt this year's report will be integral to the design of this work and the work of newsrooms, NGOs and professionals working on some of the industry's most pressing issues everywhere. So with that in mind, let me end here, and I'd like to welcome Nick to the stage to introduce the report. Or Rasmus.
For coming out today here in the room, and thanks to those who are watching this online. Thanks, Jane, for the very kind words for the work we do as a team at the Reuters Institute. My name is Rasmus Nielsen. I'm director of the Institute. This year is the largest digital news report we've ever done, covering 47 markets on 6 continents. We are delighted that we've been able to add Morocco this year to further expand the truly global footprint of this piece of research, where people can learn so much from one another. A reminder about the methodology. This is a digital news report. It is based on an online survey conducted by our good friends at YouGov. In some of the markets that we cover, this will, because of limited internet penetration, underrepresent the habits, preferences, and views of older people, less privileged people, and other communities who don't have full access to the internet. But in those countries with high internet penetration, these are nationally representative samples. The work is made possible by 19 different sponsors. We are very grateful to the Google News Initiative, the main sponsor of the Digital News Report, as well as all our other supporters on this, media organizations such as the BBC and Ofcom and NHK, media regulators like Ofcom here in the UK, universities, foundations, and others who care about exploring the future of journalism. Code for Africa enabled our expansion into Morocco, and we're very grateful to our longstanding partners here at Reuters for hosting the event, and Edelman for continuing to support the report as well. I will now hand it over to Nick, who is the main star, and then we'll have a panel discussion afterwards before we open up to questions from everyone in the room here. Thank you very much. Welcome, Nick.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. Good morning, everybody. One of the biggest changes, you've heard about it already, that we're seeing right now is with what's going on with platforms. And that, of course, is partly linked to AI, it's partly audience behavior, and it's also partly those changing strategies of the tech companies themselves. And the most obvious example of this is with Facebook, where we see that significant decline in weekly use for finding, sharing, or consuming news. So this is part of a deliberate strategy to downplay politics and news and invest in content that it sees as being more engaging for its users, and also pushing into some of those individual creators. So this is aggregate data for a number of the social media and video platforms for 12 countries we've been tracking for some time. And the other big trend you can see here is the sharp growth over the last few years in those video networks or visually led networks, so YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. Of course, Facebook and X are also leaning into video and prioritizing formats that are designed to keep people within the platform. So the sort of post and refer model that media has depended on is becoming diminished even before you get to that challenge of search traffic potentially getting disrupted by AI. So this chart represents 12 mostly Western countries, but actually we see these shifts moving even faster elsewhere. So specifically, if we look at the use of TikTok for news, we see really rapid growth in countries in the global south. So for example, Kenya, Thailand, more than a third of the samples say they use TikTok for news. It's played really significant role in elections, the EU elections, Argentina, Indonesia, particularly with young people and politicians connecting to young people. Just to compare that with news use in the UK and US, you can see much lower numbers, though of course younger people here are also using TikTok much more for news. If we look at YouTube consumption for news, so this is even higher, much higher, over 31% say they use TikTok now for news weekly. But again, a similar disproportionate importance in the global south, so less important in Northern European countries, US, Brazil, Latin America, somewhere more in the middle. And then sort of picking up on a theme we talked about last year is within these video and social networks, it's proving much harder for traditional media to cut through and connect in the way they did in Facebook or Twitter. And this year we asked people to name some of the accounts that they are following most regularly. And these are just a few of the young news creators that they talked about. So Hugo Decrypt in France is really the go-to person for under 30s now around news. More named overall in our data than Le Monde or some of the other big brands. TLDR News here in the UK, Jack Kelly with Explainers, really resonating again with that younger demographic. Vita Spihar in the US, very popular TikTok account, some of the people that we found. But of course, it's not just young people and it's not just short form video. We also find some extremely well-known, often controversial stars also building audiences for long-form content via online platforms. So Tucker Carlson, the most mentioned individual account in the US, according to our data, along with a whole range of extremely partisan voices. In the UK, it tends to be actually more traditional correspondents from traditional brands, anchors, mentioned more, though of course Piers Morgan is now operating online first. And he was also widely cited. We have a detailed chapter on this in the final report looking at 6 countries. So these are some of the reasons why people say they like long-form and short-form videos. So the sense of authenticity that trust, that it doesn't come with the sort of agendas and bias that they sometimes see from social media. Convenience, which is partly about the format, the short format. It's also about the fact that the algorithm aligns with your personal interests, so it's much more relevant. And then thirdly, that range of perspectives that people really like as well, and often the depth that you can get from those platforms as well. As we've heard from Jane, this year we're seeing a record number of elections around the world, including right now here in the UK. And they come at a time of rising concern about misinformation of various kinds, including AI-generated fakes. So overall, in our data, we find 59% across all markets worry about their ability to tell what is real and what is fake on the internet when it comes to news. That's up for the second year in a row. And you can see that there are bigger increases in some of those countries that are holding or have been holding elections recently, such as the US, South Africa, and India. It also remains high in the UK too, compared with international averages. And this comes as online platforms are increasingly becoming affected by synthetic media, by AI videos, imagery, photorealistic imagery in many cases, which is extremely hard to detect. In talking to respondents, our qualitative research found that these were widely seen, and by those people who saw them, they really worried not about where things are today, but where things are heading quite soon if we see the similar amounts of technological progress. And in that regard, for the first time this year, we've asked about specific platforms and the extent to which people find it easy or difficult to distinguish trustworthy news from untrustworthy news. And consistently across countries, we find TikTok and X are the networks where users of these platforms are most concerned. And certainly fact-checking organizations around the world have raised a number of alarms about both networks recently in the case of elections or other stories. In this year's report, we've looked at emerging attitudes to AI and the news much more widely, including how publishers themselves are now starting to integrate Gen AI into workflows and into products. So in the survey, we asked about two scenarios, how comfortable people were with these two different scenarios. Firstly, where content is produced mainly by AI with some human oversight. So an example might be where AI is a bot that is writing the stories or maybe giving a response to a query. And in general, what we see here is high levels of discomfort, high levels of suspicion, a bit more comfortable in the US than in the UK, which is interesting, perhaps linked to sort of higher levels of awareness and usage in the US. And then in the second scenario, where humans remain in charge of the content, but AI is doing supporting work in the background, we see a very different story. In both the US and the UK, we see people more comfortable than uncomfortable. Though it's also worth noting that it's very early days. A lot of people still don't have opinions, so it's still emerging. In our qualitative work, we were able to dig a lot deeper into this issue. We showed people different examples of how the industry is beginning to use AI. And again, this really confirms those findings about greater comfort with the back-end tasks. So here's an example of someone recognizing the efficiency benefits to publishers, but also to themselves in potentially providing them with copy that's more accessible and more relevant and more personal to them. By contrast, the consensus around content creation is more about fear, suspicion, concerns about that potential unreliability of these systems at the fore, and really that point about wanting humans to remain in control, especially around important stories like elections. So all of this talk about AI brings us inevitably to the question of trust, where, as you've heard, the headline figure has remained stable, a rare piece of good news from the DNR. 40% say that they trust most news most of the time. It's a little bit lower here in the UK. But this year we asked our respondents to tell us which factors were most important in defining which news outlet to trust. And these results are not surprising, but I think they're really clear. They're also very consistent across countries and age groups. People expect the media to have high standards of accuracy, high standards of ethics, to be transparent and open as far as possible, to be unbiased, or at least to be open about biases, not to exaggerate or sensationalize, and to be fair in coverage of different groups. And so if we find that people have low trust, it's because for one reason or another, they don't believe these things are happening right now. And so if publishers want to improve trust, it is about persuading the public that they care about these things and are adhering to those. I think many media companies right now are doubling down on this idea of transparency and openness. With a brand like the BBC, Verify, for example. And our data suggests this is going down well with people who already trust the news, but it's much less likely to make a difference with people who are already skeptical or even distrustful of your output. And in those groups, we see much lower scores. So beyond trust, one of the key challenges for commercial media is how you get more people to pay for online news, especially given the unpredictability in the advertising market. So every year in the digital news report, we track the proportion that say that they pay for online news, either through subscription, membership, or donation. And what we find is every year, the highest proportion for news, paying for news is in Nordic countries like Norway. Higher levels of payment in the US too, around 22%, but still, much lower here in the UK. The overall average for these 20 countries we look at is 17%. That's unchanged for the last 3 years. So the growth is pretty minimal right now, where it exists at all. As in previous years, we find that there are a few big brands taking a very significant slice of the subscription pie. So the New York Times, for example, in our data, something like 40% of all the subscribers in the US now, and obviously the introduction of those all-access bundles has extended the New York Times lead over many other providers. Here in the UK, it's a little bit more split. You have the Telegraph, you have the Times and the Guardian as the three leading paid content brands. But we're also seeing the growth of sort of smaller, lower cost niche subscriptions, local subscriptions, aggregator subscriptions. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening beyond the big brands too. This year, we have asked people how much they pay for their digital subscriptions, for their main subscription, and we compared this to the average full price. And what we see here in the UK is a pattern which shows that a significant proportion are paying less than that full price, that average price. So essentially, there is still a lot of discounting going on to keep the numbers as high as possible. And when we dig into the detail of the brands people say they pay for, and we compare it with the advertised full price of those brands, we find overall something like 40% are paying less than the full price in the UK, 46% in the US. So differences between countries there. But it's clear that beyond raw numbers that people talk about, there's a deeper problem still of value for many people. So the final challenge I wanted to talk about is evidence that people are turning away from news, either because they don't see it as relevant or they find it difficult or depressing. And this year, across countries, 39% say they sometimes or often avoid the news, and that's the highest level we've seen since we tracked this in 2017. It's actually higher in the UK, 46%. And many of the open survey comments that we got related to the war in the Middle East or Ukraine, but also that sort of sense of powerlessness that people feel, and also the relentlessness of the current news agenda is a strong theme reflected, I think, by this comment and many more. A number of publishers are looking to address these problems of news avoidance in different ways. One way is by introducing so-called user needs models that look to balance stories that update people on the latest news with ones that maybe educate or inspire people or provide different perspectives. This was the original BBC model a few years ago, and many others are now taking that and extending it and implementing it within their organizations. And in this year's report, we've asked respondents how important 8 separate different user needs were and whether people felt the media was doing a good job in delivering against them. So firstly, across countries, we see a really consistent hierarchy where people absolutely value the updating function, the latest news, but they also really value context, explanation, understanding, and then providing that range of views on important issues as well. Younger people, interestingly, a little bit more likely to value news that make people feel better about the world. That's the Inspire Me function. And also connecting with others. So there's a few differences demographically, but mostly pretty similar in terms of what people think the media should be doing. And then if we layer on the proportion that thinks the media does a good job, that's the middle column, and then we compare that with the importance, we can do some analysis to see where there are some gaps, potentially some areas for improvement, and that's what's represented on the right-hand side column there in the orange. So it's clear that the wide range of perspectives is the biggest gap that people talk about, and it speaks, I think, to that point about representation, about people not wanting to get trapped in sort of narrow filter bubbles, or so-called narrow filter bubbles. And then inspiration, I think, also comes through very strongly, so making people feel better about the world, a counter to that depressing nature of the news agenda that we talked about before. Of course, there are no silver bullets here, but there's a really interesting chapter that you might want to delve into in the report itself. So just a quick recap of some of the main findings this year before we head into the panel. So changing platform strategies are making it harder to find news audiences and to engage existing ones even before Gen AI disruption kicks in. Video, short form, long form video becoming a more important part of the mix, especially with younger groups, especially in the global south. In terms of AI usage, people are already worried about misinformation, and AI increases the importance, according to our research, of humans staying in control, especially when it comes to creating content around important news topics. Subscription, which has been a real bright spot, is stable, but growth is very limited, and many consumers are still struggling to see the value. And then there are those questions about whether traditional news products are turning people away, whether they need to be engaging people in different ways with a wider range of perspectives and more inspiration. So a little food for thought and for the panel, but thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Nick, for giving us the top-line findings from this year's Digital News Report. I often say that we have a difficult job at the Institute of making sense of all this data, but many of you in the room and everyone here on the panel have an even more difficult job of navigating all these changes and opportunities and challenges. I'm really pleased that we have a panel here of excellent leaders from the industry to talk us through how they are thinking about some of these challenges. Rosina, the editor-in-chief of the Bureau for Investigative Journalism, Anna, the CEO of The Guardian, Rachel, CEO of ITN, and Matthew, who's head of strategy from our hosts, Reuters. So I think we should sort of keep in mind as we think about the way that all of you are and your peers in the industry are thinking about navigating these challenges, that from the point of view of a lot of the public, what we document here is not a crisis. There is unprecedented abundance of choice, diversity of content. When we ask people about their confidence in distinguishing between trustworthy and untrustworthy sources, yes, there is some concern, in particular on TikTok and Twitter, but actually a plurality and in several cases a majority of people feel confident about their ability to navigate this information. And when we ask the user need questions, while some people are undecided by whether the news media does the jobs that people want them to do, there are actually very few people who are unhappy who think the news media are doing a bad job. So from the point of view of the public, it's not at all clear that this is a crisis. But it's of course very challenging from the point of view of publishers. And maybe we can start with the platform resets that Nick highlighted this year. The old referral model, smaller publishers, it was a challenging environment for everyone, but smaller publishers tended to benefit a bit more from this than bigger publishers. And some big publishers, including, according to our research, The Guardian, did comparatively well in this environment, benchmarked against your industry peers. Anna, do you want to say something about how you're thinking about these platform research from a Guardian point of view?
Sure. I think it's quite important to separate out what I think is a continuum, possibly an acceleration of things that have been true for a while. And then, I mean, as you were sort of alluding to, and then a sense of what's new in this world, and so therefore what's genuinely disruptive. And and sort of less familiar. And so I think The Guardian, we've always thought about responsible reach, and I think that's a sense of trying to prioritise audiences over this idea of traffic, which is really, you need to think about direct, meaningful relationships, and if they're not direct and meaningful relationships, then you have to be very honest with yourself about what you're kind of prioritising or what sort of victory you're celebrating. I think that's going to continue to be true, and so I think there are some things that are in a sense going to stay the same even as the world sort of changes around us. Off-platform, I think you have to view as long-term brand building, and I think the idea that there's going to be an instant sort of value exchange, that has been eroding for a while. And I mean, you know, and that we're just continuing to see that kind of decline. I do think that the emergence of AI, and particularly sort of integration and the experimentation of AI into search, and also then how AI allows you to create at scale sort of content which then sort of, you know, pollutes and then corrodes the kind of the quality of the ecosystem, that is genuinely new. And that's leading to a sense of disruption and change that I think everybody's trying to kind of navigate and think through. And I think the honest answer at that is it's incredibly early. So you're going to see a lot of disruption, and it's coming back to what are the truths that you have to hold on to. And again, I think it comes back to that. What do you stand for as a brand? What is it that makes you distinctive? And how do you build on that through your editorial and through journalism to build those very real relationships that then come back to you?
Thanks, Anna. Rosina, the Bureau for Investigative Journalism is an important player, but a rather smaller player than The Guardian. How do you think about these changes from your point of view, challenges, opportunities, and how you navigate it?
Yeah, I mean, we're a small, independent, not-for-profit newsroom. We're quite young, 14 years old, and our sort of history is in co-publishing. So we lose brand visibility, we haven't thought about direct audience, and yet our verticals are highly global. We're a local to global newsroom, and I kind of really concur with what Anna said about building a really meaningful relationship with audiences. So for me, the report is fascinating. There is challenge, but for us there's opportunity. We're at the start of our audience and digital journey. So for us it's about what exactly is our point of distinction. I think that's really important in a crowded market. So it's long-term investigations. We spend months, sometimes years on investigations. The quality and quantity is really world-class. We have a really rigorous fact-checking process, and most importantly, perhaps we're an impact newsroom. So our mandate is to expose injustice and spark change, which means we are funded largely via philanthropy to drive social good through journalism. So we love a good headline, like all journalists do, but we have impact producers who are embedded in our newsroom, who use that journalism in order to drive change, whether that's with NGOs, other newsrooms around the world, or with Parliament. So it's really, the kind of road to direct audience has really helped us interrogate and specify what our mission is, what our purpose is. We will continue working in a co-publishing way. For us, it's about global reach, which isn't necessarily the first measure of success, but the reputation and world-class accuracy and independence of what we do really matters. I would also say the global scalability. So I was lucky enough to work with Dimitri at the World Service launching the DigiHub, which was essentially about scaling globally relevant content. For the Bureau, I think our 5 verticals are highly scalable, whether that's green finance, climate change, anti-corruption, big tech, misinfo, disinfo, democracy. So it scales audiences and demographic of all kinds. I think we are both sort of lucky and unlucky. You know, we are quite nascent in the sort of digital world, but it means that we can choose specifically which platforms we go at and what our messaging is, and think about building a bureau community. So I would say the newsroom that I run is pretty young, actually. Tonally, we need to push on the relevant tones. So influencers, I think, are really important. They're doing something that really resonates with younger audiences. It's about authenticity of voice. And I've sort of come from, my background is largely at the BBC, which I think is doing amazing work. But I think we struggle with kind of relating to audiences in an authentic way that doesn't sort of extend or overextend beyond the impartiality line. So how can I use my team to kind of really deliver a sort of personal product with the expertise that they have? What platform should we think about? So definitely TikTok, Instagram. For us, newsletters is a really key strategy, and I was talking to Nick earlier about the sort of proliferation of newsletters, but we have niche specialisms. So we should be making the most of that, and the things that resonate with audience as we're doing our testing are exactly those specialisms. So we are adapting how we tell the story, who we tell it to, how we can reach audiences, not just the super served. So, you know, for us, free-to-air access is really important. That might be a moral imperative, but for us, we may be challenged on that partially. But it's important. Those audiences that we need to reach are maybe the ones that are not paying, but that doesn't mean that we're not going to try and reach them, even if they don't pay for us.
A lot of things there that we should return to around sort of serving parts of the public who are not currently convinced that the value proposition of paying for news, as well as the point about influencers. But Rachel, I wanted to turn to you on one of the points that Nick highlighted of the platform reset is the, in our data at least, increasing centrality of video. There are parts of the publishing space where you can't begin to form a sentence that contains words, video, and something to do with Silicon Valley before people are, you and me, outside. So from your point of view, how do you look at this growing prominence of video on platforms? Opportunity, threat, or a mirage?
No, I think it absolutely plays to our strengths and our heritage at ITN, and really it's sort of central to our public service broadcast remit in that sense. And you know, like everybody else, for a long time we've realised our audiences aren't just in one place, and it's our duty to go and find them and deliver content wherever they are. I think now that video is particularly taking off, that's good for us. We're seeing growth across all the video platforms, and we are reaching audiences in different ways. But some of it is bespoke, some of it's shorter explainers or something that's going direct to the platforms. Some of it is just chunks of the more television type content. So I don't think we should have this idea that it's just short explainers. They are flying, they're doing really well. But after October the 7th, we were seeing really long chunks of Channel 4 News being watched on YouTube and in other places. So I think it allows people to have a whole range of content, and it does play to our strengths in that sense. I think the challenge for all our newsrooms, which is the same everywhere, is funding all of that and keeping up several streams of content. And we're seeing now more with the streaming platforms, whether it's ITVX or 4 Streaming, also having to put a lot of content there, as well as keeping the linear traditional audiences and getting across all the platforms. So, you know, it's a lot for us to do, but so I think it plays to our strengths. I think it plays to that style of trusted, impartial eyewitness journalism that we're particularly known for. And as I'm sure everyone here knows, that we only have to comply our television content, but we choose to comply all our digital content in the same way. So I think it's got that hallmark of quality to it. And you know, it's very easy for anybody to make video now. The sort of entry level is so low, but actually to go out and do proper high quality eyewitness journalism is still hard, and it's still expensive. And I think that shows, that comes through, or the investigations or the original work we're doing, that's flying on the platforms as well as on traditional channels.
We may return to this, the point about impartiality when we talk about trust later on. I think Matthew will recognize that impartiality doesn't need to be a sort of a cumbersome regulatory obligation, but could be a positive choice as an editorial principle and an editorial mission. I wonder whether anyone, before we turn to some points around influences, any video skeptics on the panel? You give us content, we give you reach. We've heard these terms of trade before. Any skeptics, or is it all looking great?
I think it's important to separate out, I mean, not all video is the same, and I think that's a really important thing for anyone to think about. And what you've seen TikTok kind of really drive and then be obviously kind of copied by other platforms is essentially the rise of the individual, and within that, you know, really understanding a short form content that then is very cleverly, algorithmically kind of, you know, targeted and personalized. And I think what you see on YouTube is different and distinct. And there you'll see things that have, things that tend to do really well on YouTube are things that have longevity, because that's the way that the algorithms and the platform works. So not all video is the same, and it's really where do you, how capable are you as an organization of experimenting with the different needs of those platforms and delivering against it while still being true to yourselves. Because what doesn't work is when you try and do something that's just completely not part of your DNA or totally sort of, you know, separated or kind of unfamiliar, and then it just tends to not work and be a waste of resource.
And the built-in business opportunities is also somewhat different from platform to platform. Rachel, on influencers, someone who's sort of close to ITV was on our chart. There were also people who used to be close to other titles on the panel. How do you think about the point that Rosina made about some of the things that might be driving the rise of some of these individual creators and influencers, and how one can sort of work with that grain as a news publisher?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd all welcome anybody who's interested in news and wants to engage people in news, and I think that's something to be welcomed. And we've got such a strong mixed news media here that I think there's room for everybody. I think some of it we're doing within our brands. So we were talking earlier about Robert Peston, who's had a very strong digital presence, for a significant amount of time now, as well as being able to lead News at 10 and having his own television show. So you don't have to just be sort of young TikTok cliche type. Sorry, Robert, I think I'm allowed to say that. But then we've also got some of our younger journalists doing fantastic things as well, and it's still working with that same standard of journalism. So I think they're complementary. I think we should remember as well that we're within sort of public service media, but also across the board with UK media, sometimes our journalism is the starting point. So influencers might be picking up on that, and it's almost as if we're being a bit open source with our journalism. And so they piggyback maybe is too harsh a word, but the starting point is what else they've got there. But I think as well, take something like the election. A lot of these influencers are quite narrow and quite niche. Brilliant, great, serving an audience there. But something like a general election here, you need to see every view. You need the balance. You need all the reasons that we're regulated so that people can get all the information they need. So I think it's complementary. I don't see it as a threat. I'd welcome it. There's things we have to learn about being very personal with audiences, but I think we are picking up and adapting as we go along anyway.
Matthew, I want to turn to you for a sort of Reuters perspective on this. And I think in conversations around the future of the industry, sometimes there can be a tendency to focus mostly on a limited number of upmarket global brands that can sort of reasonably expect to build a reader revenue-based model. We have a diverse panel today where that's an important part of the Guardian's model, but not every publisher on the panel has that model. And Reuters clients are certainly much more diverse than that. How do you think about these changes in the platform environment, but also in the business of news from an agency point of view?
Well, I think from the business of news and from our perspective as an agency trying to serve, as you say, customers of all sizes and all parts of the world, we have to listen to what everyone is saying and what we've talked about on the panel so far. Things are continuously changing and have evolved quickly in the last couple of years, and they will change again with the generative AI and other things that are coming up that we don't even know about. And we have to be able to adapt and serve those challenges that people are facing. So we can bring the scale of being an agency to those smaller publications, to those smaller publishers, and help them adapt to the way they need to do things. You know, gone are the days where they can just throw something up on a blog or on their own website and that's it, all they need to do. Thinking about all of these different channels, the different ways they attract audiences, the way you retain and engage those audiences, that's a difficult job for a smaller organisation, particularly when they're not having these types of revenue streams coming in from the traditional side of their business. So we can come in and help with the tools, with the capabilities, and with our experience of dealing with customers in all different parts of the world, and hopefully sustain that industry, because we need them to do well, so we do well, and you know, that's in it. That's what's in it for us.
I wonder whether you want to share any thoughts on the point that Rosina made about being a publisher, that while you obviously do have a website and an app and a number of social channels where people go direct to Reuters and engage with Reuters News, you are also primarily an agency and a business-to-business publisher. How do you think about what it takes to help people recognize Reuters as a brand and what Reuters tries to stand for in this environment?
Well, I think part of that is about staying, as we've said already, staying true to our values and true to what we have done in the past, being authentic about what we do and be considered where we go to places. And I think that comes down to what we'll talk about a bit later around trust and reliability. For us, we have to be considerate of the fact that we are serving largely a global audience for international news. We're not meeting some of the needs of the local requirements. So we have an audience that does come directly to us and that sees value in coming directly to us. But it's not about us pushing ourselves through our customers and then trying to steal their audiences. It's about supplementing and complementing those. I think for us, we have seen the success of things like our YouTube channel, our direct podcasts and our website. But we also recognise and feel the same effects around how we monetize those things, and where some places our audiences engage with us, but there's very little opportunity for us to directly monetize that. It is about us building our brand and reinforcing that brand, and then hopefully encouraging others to keep coming back to us either directly or give people in the industry confidence to come back to Reuters as someone that is recognised and worth being part of their ecosystem.
I wonder, Anna, whether I can ask you to say a bit more about how you think about the business side of this. So I think two things that stand out very clearly in the research we've been doing for some years in this area. One is that given the combination of the abundance of news that's available for free at the point of consumption from a wide range of different actors, including both commercial, public service, and non-profits, and given the relatively low perceived value of a lot of that news from much of the public are not and will not, or at least right now, pay for news. And the second one is that when we turn to the market for people paying for news, it seems to be very strong winner takes most dynamics. So, you know, as additional forms of reader revenue seems to be becoming more important for The Guardian, where do you see this heading? Is this going to be a sort of a zero-sum game where it's going to be you and the New York Times, daggers at dawn at the end of time, duking it out? Or do you think it's going to be opportunities that lie outside the sort of current number of people paying?
Well, I think we are very big believers in our model, this sense of being open to all and funded by many. And I think that is a real strength because it comes back to how are you distinct and differentiated within a market. And so the fact that we're open to all allows us to essentially find and build audiences all around the world. And that's kind of going to now be an incredible strength because I think that sense of international diversification is very important. I think the sense that you can serve people who are unable or unwilling to pay, while at the same time also deliver an emotional reason for them wanting to support your journalism. And that's different from other people's models, which might be more transactionally based or more based on the desire to be able to consume that content, which therefore has to in itself stand for something and be differentiated. So I think everyone needs to find their own model that works for them and works for sort of, you know, their heritage, their values, their brand, what they stand for, how they can lean into their strengths. We are still growing all around the world when it comes to supporters. I think that from our point of view, we still see there being tremendous headroom, but I think it is very much about leaning into that sense of what is it that's making people want to support Guardian journalism. And it is that they're able to discover it. It is that it's independent. It is that they feel that by supporting it, they can enable to others to read it for free. That's a really important kind of motivation. And it is around the breadth of what you do. So if there are some areas where news is more commoditized, you know, because there are many people who are kind of, you know, fighting or sort of kind of delivering in the breaking news political area, where are there things that you're doing that are unique, you know, that you're telling stories or you're kind of covering issues or you're leaning into investigations that others aren't doing. And audiences are very astute about identifying, I think, what makes things different and significant and matter to them.
Can I jump in on that?
Please, absolutely. I will only say before you do it that I want the last thing you said, and I want that framed and put in every newsroom around the world.
Which bit?
The public is astute.
Yeah.
And people are good judges of what they value.
Well, I sort of want to build on that, and I've said this many times. We have something really precious in this country. We have some of the finest journalism in the world, and it doesn't surprise me in a way that people may be a bit in two minds about paying for it, because they have access to a lot of fantastic free journalism of the highest standard. Now, we're really pleased that the Media Act just got through before the government dissolved, but you know that is holding on to the whole public service broadcast structure. But at the moment, and until recently, it's been very easy to find trusted, impartial content that the audiences know they can go to. What we're really keen to see is what happens to that in a non-linear world, where, you know, what's the prominence for the PSBs and what's prominence for news within it, what's the equivalent of tuning in at 10 o'clock. And throw into that what we're all assuming is going to be quite a lot of synthetic content and fake news and misinformation. It's about the public still being able to access that. And I like the fact that people seem to have confidence in our journalism enough to feel they don't need to pay for it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
But you know, that we could be saying something very different in a year's time and in 2 years' time here. And I think this is a very important moment right now where we understand and value what we've got and find ways to preserve it.
Maybe this is the point where we should turn to AI. Most publishers are experimenting. Some publishers are deploying. And the public seems to be quite skeptical. I hope that there are people who work in technology companies who recognize this skepticism and are mindful of that as they make decisions too. But we can talk about publishers first, and if anyone wants to engage on the platform side too, that'll be interesting too. But Matthew, I mean, Reuters, as Jane said at the outset, is definitely experimenting, also deploying some things. How do you think about how one can make use of these tools without running afoul of some of the risks?
Well, yes, we're very fortunate at Reuters being part of Thomson Reuters, the amount of investment that's already been made and the learnings we already have. Thomson Reuters has products out in the market heavily using the new Gen AI technologies to solve workflow problems and and challenges that lawyers face. And what we're able to do and what we've able to see is how we can take the learnings from the application and bring them into the newsroom and understand how best to leverage the tools to augment what people do predominantly. You know, we have a long history, and we're not alone in the use of technology and use of automation tools. We were using old-fashioned AI before it became fashionable to speed up and sort of deal with the processes that we want our newsroom and the journalists in the newsroom to spend time doing what they got into being in the news for, not doing admin, not doing the rote work, and using the tools to do things. In that sense, as I think the Digital News Report showed, people are pretty comfortable with that. They may not be aware of how much we were already doing in terms of automation before the most recent advances. And I think over time we will see people get more and more comfortable because they would expect and demand us to be more efficient about how we're using things. And I think people who work in Reuters and in Thomson Reuters also want to use those tools and get the most out of those so they can be the most productive, produce the content that they want to produce and really focus on those things that they care about. We need to be really careful about how we do that, and you've heard reference to that in terms of where the human is in the loop there. We have very strict governance process, and as do others, and that's something that in the early days when going back December before the last, when this first came out, that was a big concern, and we're always very fearful around hallucinations and around sort of the false information that may be created by the models. But what we have learned is through the proper training and the proper application of those tools, we can feel confident in the results, and with the human review and with our strict processes and our oversight, we can see and we can advance how much we produce, how we reach the different types of audiences that we were just talking about, produce the different formats that maybe we need to produce, and really do things in a way that will resonate, I think, with other audiences very quickly. And we'll be transparent about when we use things. We'll be clear about what we've used and how we've used it. And I think that will help give people some reassurance over, okay, they're using it for that, but not this. I feel comfortable that that's a good use of those tools, and it makes sense. Why wouldn't they do that? Versus, okay, I can see where that line is. You know, we can continuously invest and have been investing in those tools. Jane mentioned we've deployed some things to our newsroom already. Hopefully we'll bring some of the learnings and the capabilities that we have to our agency customers, to those that aren't in a fortunate position as we are to have leveraged other parts of our organisation making those investments. And we'll be able to sort of advance the way people do things and help deal with some of the other challenges that we're facing and coming out. This is an enabler for all of us, and it's something we have to lean into. Any organisation that is hoping it goes away or that doesn't want to engage with it will fall foul pretty quickly, and we all know that. I don't think anyone is pretending otherwise, and so it's really about how quickly we get to it and how much we get out of it.
Rosina, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I mean, Matthew works at a global news agency that's also part of a larger group that's made very large acquisitions in the AI legal space. From a bureau point of view, how do you think about how to approach this issue of generative AI and whether you can make it work for you?
Yeah, I mean, it's counter-cyclical to investigative journalism in many ways. I mean, our work is deeply human, forensic, and requires a high degree of sort of human-led decision-making. So it's something that we need to think about in terms of scale and how we can reach global audience as well. And I sort of concur with what Matthew said about transparency. So how do we tell audiences the ways in which we've used AI? It might be to, I know, rewrite some of our newsletters in order to make them more accessible rather than doing an investigation, and also within a context where you know, some of the capabilities now of AI to put stuff out there that is you know, kind of radically false. You're kind of fighting the tsunami of content, A, on a layer of content creation, and B, in terms of, you know, if we were to mention how we might use AI in our sort of news content generation, you know, do audiences have a nuanced enough understanding of it? I don't know at the moment. I think I would, we've just sent one of our team to an away day looking at you know, how we could best use it in the newsroom in terms of getting to more audiences, but I still think it's, you know, tread cautiously and carefully.
I want to do one last sort of rapid fire round around trust, and when we wrap that up, we'll open up to questions from the floor. So start thinking, and when we do that, I'll try to make sure we get a diverse range of different people have a chance to ask questions of the panelists. Before we do that on trust, crudely put, our research suggests that when many people do not trust the news in general, or only trust a few news brands, it's not because they don't want news that's accurate and transparently produced and fair and unbiased. It's that they don't believe the news media are delivering on this. So in a sense, that's good news in one sense, that people seem to want things that many journalists would like to offer them, but it's of course also quite challenging if people feel that the industry and the profession is falling short of this. So if I can ask each of you to share some thoughts about how you think of this issue of trust from your point of view, and then we'll open up to questions from people in the room. Matthew.
Well, I think you know, Reuters and Thomson Reuters, Jane mentioned the trust principles that we have, and we have this sort of ingrained, embedded culture, as do many other organisations as well. I think it comes down to, for us, and I think for Reuters, how the importance we place on trust above everything else. The importance that we have, if that means that we will have to do something that's not in our best interest commercially, or that maybe means that we have to be late, and no one likes being late when it comes to breaking news, we will do that because trust is always the most important. And I think being honest about and being upfront about when we do make errors and correcting those quickly, and the small things we do every day across our organisation and every engagement we have with our audiences, whether it be our agency customers or our direct audiences, those are the things that we just have to keep doing. And whether it's serving a region or a market like the Nordics with a very high trust in the news, or some other areas of the world where there's a very low trust in the news, doesn't really change what we have to do day to day and how we produce what we're doing. We have to be very mindful that it's very, very hard to earn and very quick to lose. But you know, other than sort of being more transparent and over pushing what we're doing to make people aware of why we are different from others, or why we fall in that category of organisations that you maybe can trust, there's not much more we can do, and because the audience, as you said a few moments ago, is astute, and they know, and they will have a sense of when we're not being authentic or when we're maybe pushing it a bit too far. I think for us, we have to, you know, continue to pursue and do the things that we've been doing around supporting, whether it's misinformation or doing media literacy, education support, the work we do through the foundation at Thomson Reuters. Those are things that we can do to help the broader ecosystem. But it's harder for us to just sort of be continuously saying, "Oh, trust us, don't trust them." You know, that isn't going to be us, and we're never going to do that. We can only be authentic to ourselves and keep pushing that.
Rachel?
I think trust is absolutely the heart of what we do, always has been. Take that really, really seriously. We're not complacent about it, not making assumptions, but it starts, with our type of journalism. It's particularly doing eyewitness journalism. It's getting to the heart of the story. It's talking to the people at the heart of the story. Being all around the UK, not just sitting in London, and certainly all our news services very much anchored in communities, and it's listening to them. It's making sure we have diversity within the newsrooms and diversity in our content that we put out. And it's, holding that very dear in every single thing that we do. I also think it's not just about us, though. It goes back to my point about making sure that our content still surfaces, and there's a responsibility there for the platforms. And for example, your YouTube has a fantastic breaking news shelf, which sometimes our content appears on and people can find it easily. It's not to everybody and it's not every day, and certainly we're not seeing anything like that from the other video platforms. So it's about that collective responsibility of getting our content there. We'll take our trust side of it carefully. But it's bigger than that, and AI will open up that challenge even further, and we'll do our bit to hold on to our sort of trust side, our side of the trust bargain. We will keep doing human-led journalism. We've also protected our archive recently to keep the value of that as a sort of trusted news legacy, and everything we do in the future will go into that and continue to be proven to be human-made and believable. But I say we can only do one part of it. This is something for the new government, for regulators, for everybody to be involved in to protect what we've got.
Anna.
I mean, everything that my lovely colleagues have said, but I think trust is more important than ever. I think it's completely paramount. I think for us it's to do with transparency, how we hold ourselves to account, and also independence. I think I'm very interested by how important the fact that we are completely independent, that we're beholden to no one, that we don't have a billionaire owner, and I think that makes a very, very big difference to how people feel that they can trust the journalism. I do think that this point about if we continue to take these kind of the sense of our audience trusting us incredibly seriously, how the platforms then feed into that is incredibly significant as you look at a world where AI begins to, where it essentially turns platforms into publishers because they're creating summaries and they're creating content, and it's questionable about how much you can trust that, and it's been sort of shown over and over again. And I think your report's really interesting, coming back to this point about audiences being astute. What they're saying about AI and AI's influence within news and journalism is complete testimony to that. They're smart enough to know that it isn't something that either they don't understand what it's going to be used for, which is completely legitimate because I think the actual use cases of AI are still somewhat unclear at the moment, but they also understand that capacity to trust it, given that this is a probabilistic technology, it's not humans, it's not based on judgment, and it can't be held to account, is really kind of problematic. And so I think how governments intervene, how we think about labelling, how we think about use of existing IP within the tools that are rolling out, all of that's going to be very, very important for, as this sort of disruption rolls out.
Thanks, Anna. Rosina.
I would agree with what everybody has said, but from my perspective, so I took over as head of news at 5 Live on the week of the EU referendum. 5 Live is the largest network newsroom outside of London, and my editors were all saying the country will vote for Brexit, which was sort of the counter narrative to, I think what many sort of media organisations and generally public institutions were saying or thinking. And it really sort of taught me about being close to your audience. 5 Live is a really interactive station, north of England. I still live in Leeds, I work in London. And there is something, I think, kind of very potent about being outside of the capital city, first of all, and kind of living amongst audiences and having a kind of very different experience. So trust, trust takes time, in any relationship, in any sort of consumer business. And so how close are we to audiences? And I remember we had just rolled out, when I was in a BBC Leeds editor, the apprenticeship programme. And the number of people who, when they came through the door at the second or third round, who could just not believe they were through the door of an organisation that had 3 letters of it, and not just the BBC, but I think many of our institutions feel quite arm's length to some audiences. The second is absolutely about diversity of storytelling, which you've alluded to. So how are we going to audiences where they are. You know, we have to think about kind of referrals back, but how are we getting into their space? The third is be of audiences. So how reflective are newsrooms of the UK or the sort of populations that you're serving to? At the Bureau, I would say we're quite diverse. 50% of our senior leadership are women of colour. We have a really good gender split and age. There's more to do. But I think class especially is also an issue. And so if we want trust, we need to look and feel like the people that we are serving. I also think where we live, so, you know, kind of sort of metropolitan focused isn't going to cut it. And I go back to the kind of you know, the EU referendum. I think we tend generally to report from buildings and from institutions rather than really think about the granularity of people's lives. And I also think that, you know, whilst world events are super important to report on, I also think about the towns and the villages that we're not reporting on in the UK. Buses, for example, you know, it's quicker for me to get to London than it is to cross the Pennines to get to Salford. So how are we being of audiences? And the final thing is about pluralism, which I absolutely agree on, and to Anna's point about independence, I think you know, we need a vibrant pluralist ecology in the provision of news, but also pluralism internally. And I was really struck by a News Rewired session that I went to that Lucy Kung was presenting at, and she was talking about how newsrooms are kind of requiring a different kind of leadership now. And younger talent are kind of really wanting something that is different, whether that's tonally, work-life balance, narrative, being partial. I mean, we can't be partial, but you have to care about what you're reporting on. So I think for trust, we kind of need to pivot a bit, both capitalising on the talent we have inside of newsrooms, so more bottom-up decision-making, and also of the market as well. So those would be my sort of key points.
Thank you so much, Christina. We will rely on the kindness of our host at Reuters and run it a little bit over, because we want to make sure there are some opportunities at least for questions. So who would like to ask a question? Please direct it at one of the panelists, and please say who you are when you ask the question. And there are mics making the round, so we'll start at the back there.
Thank you. Matthew Walters from EY. We've spoken, Nick and the panel, about the way that barriers to entry are reducing in the industry. And I wanted to ask a question about the subscription-based self-publishers, those on the likes of Substack. I'm thinking in particular of the likes of Andrew Sullivan and his Dish proposition. Question really about the long tail of these micro-subscription publishers. Do the panel think that this fragmentation will continue, or do we think there'll be a reaggregation over the next few years back into mainstream publications? And with that, the second question I have really is, will the spend on these publishers be cannibalistic of spend on the mainstream brands, or will it be additive to it? Thank you.
Since that's a data question, I will take that from the Institute side. We will take a few questions. So we'll have one over here, please.
To Guardian's data product and content connection. We all have been really at awe at how you have been connecting those three things, and recently you have made this public-facing small tab on the front page about most engaged stories. I'm really interested about how you're thinking specifically in that direction. How do you want to develop your product specifically through the lens of engagement? Thank you.
So we'll take a question here in the front, and then we'll open up the panel. Coming.
Thank you for this panel. Maria Ramirez from El Diario from Spain. All the influencers in the report are men, and it's probably not because of the report, it's probably because that's what's the case. So first of all, is that the case, that mostly are male influencers? And second, are you worried about this trend also inside media? Thank you.
Maybe, Maria, if you pass the mic to Nick, then maybe, Nick, do you want to take the influencer question?
Yeah, in the chapter, it is true that the top 10 in most of the countries we looked at are men, and I think that speaks to how people get attention in these networks quite often. But there are women there as well, and so there is hope, I think, there as well.
Maybe if I can just add on that, it's also that women often pay a different price from being public figures, as you know from personal experience. And I think it would be naive not to recognize that is will be part of people's calculation about whether they seek those roles, especially around news and politics, and that platforms have a responsibility to think about how they respond to that challenge. In terms of the question about subscriptions from the back, so far I think it's really important to recognize that when it comes to sort of news and current affairs, relatively conventionally conceived, we mostly see these work out in very large markets, and the sort of long tail is a very thin tail in smaller markets, in less affluent markets, in smaller languages, and that a lot of the people who make a living in those spaces are often making their living off of things for which the content is essentially loss leading. That's not a criticism, it's just an observation that they make their living off of consultancy or doing PR work or other kinds of sort of secondary or businesses that benefit from them being recognized as authorities on a particular topic. In terms of whether it's additive, I think it's still an open question, but I would say we see relatively few who in that space who try to compete head to head with established actors quite reasonably. I mean, why would you go up against The Guardian or Reuters or the New York Times if you are an individual creator? And more, I think, are probably more competing in the spaces of niche industry publications. You know, what is the difference really between a niche industry publication and someone like Platformer or other highly specialized publications? I think we're seeing a blurring in that space. Anna, there was a very direct question to you at The Guardian, and then we'll take one more round of questions.
So we have long thought about responsible reach, and so that's essentially, you know, sort of how many people are you finding, how many people are you bringing, sort of how many people are reading your articles, so that's most read. And increasingly, and I think it's going to be a core part of strategic thinking going forwards, we also then think about how do you engage them more. How do you take, I suppose, audiences, you know, through your journalism, sort of through breadth of reading, and then how do you get them to sort of engage most deeply, either on single articles or then sort of, you know, from a session perspective. Hence, you have most sort of, you know, most engaged. And I think it's the sort of the bringing together of those two metrics, and really the thinking of how do you move from finding audiences to deepening the relationships with them through both engagement and frequency. That's going to be the core strategic driver. And then just to build on that, that's really then, how do you look at those metrics? You know, how do you calculate them? And then how do you surface them for the newsroom and encourage, I suppose, through data and through the right data, journalists and editors to think about how you can build those relationships through, you know, through analysis of those metrics. So it's actually a very significant thing for us. And will continue to be, I think, a core part of how we think about the necessity to deepen and retain those relationships with readers and audiences.
Take a last round of questions. So there's a question over here, Laura, behind you. Sorry.
Thank you. Holly Cook from The Economist. I remember in this room a year ago we talked a lot about the rising need for audiences to connect with personality from news organisations. And then today we've heard multiple times the word authenticity. I'm wondering whether, I think this is probably a question for Anna and Rachel, whether the possibilities of AI to create multiple versions of our human personalities or even inauthentic personalities might diminish in time in the future, might diminish our audience's need or their desire to have that personal connection. Thanks.
Thank you. We'll take two more and then we'll open it up. So there was a... Oh, thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Marcela from journalism.co.uk. I wonder, with everything we've seen in the world of overabundance of content and rise of social and rise of AI, whether as a media we are perhaps focusing on a wrong metric. Should we focus on relevancy and impact rather than sort of anything else? And if so, sorry, what metrics should we use?
Thank you. I'll ask Christina for her take on that, and then we'll take one final question here in the middle. I'm sorry. It's good exercise in the morning here. Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Naya Nilsson, BBC News, excellent panel. Very grateful to hear your points. One thing that I am concerned about for our industry is our ability to keep attracting great talent, great people, allowing them to grow. And I was thinking about it because, of course, we have got a great industry, but then my husband, who works in a commercial sector, he's gone to Cannes Lion Festival, and it's kind of the money that is around in that business. You know, it's kind of Kendrick Lamar is kind of, you know, playing the records at DJing. And then I was at their World News Editor Congress in Copenhagen a couple of weeks ago, and then I thought, oh my God, this business, we are full of people my age that are talking about problems all the time, and it feels like the parties may be going on over there, and the money and the... you get my point. So that is one thing I'm concerned about.
Maybe if I can turn to Matthew and Anna for the talent question, Rachel on the question of authenticity and AI, and then Rosina, you on the question of how we think about success if it's not sort of the volume of couch potatoes who, you know, sit on their bum watching our stuff. Matthew, talent.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always a challenge for any organisation, but for a news organisation in particular, to be continuously refreshing the people that work inside your business, so you have that representation of your audience, and you're bringing in those new skills. I think interestingly, the sort of the adoption of the technology tools and the changes that we're going through will, I think, give us an opportunity to attract people into our industry more than ever before, and we'll be even more hungry to accommodate them. And so I think there is a good time, hopefully, to be coming into our industry, and also for our ability to compete against maybe the sexier places where the party's happening, rather than in the past where we've had a very limited ability to bring people in, or a very limited subset of people that we're coming in. One of the things that we've done, if I think back to my time at Reuters, you know, the spread of where we are across the world has changed significantly and continues to change, and the demographic particularly from an age perspective of where we have people in different parts of the world is very different to maybe some of our traditional sort of central hubs. But now we're seeing that change as well, both from all aspects of diversity, but also from the point of view of just really having people that have got that hunger and that passion to bring together with the new tools that are coming in. And so I think it's an important consideration for us, because it's one of the hardest things for us to do. It's not something we can just flip overnight. But we see the benefits of it when we have done it. And success breeds success. So when people see that it's enriched the environment we work in and it's helped us do better, then we get everyone else behind it and people lean into it. So I think it's something that is difficult but is doable and is a must for us, and we're seeing real benefits from leaning into it.
Anna, do you want to take a bite of this as well?
Well, I would just say I've spent quite a lot of time at Cannes Lions, and let me assure you, it's not full of young, groovy people, in spite of Kendrick Lamar. It's full of lots of people our age, dad dancing. But it is very dominated by money, and you know, your point is well made. It's an advertising festival, and the money really sits with ad tech and with retail media, and it doesn't really sit as much with publishers anymore, and that is something that we've got to navigate. And I think, you know, one of the things that's been hardest that we don't talk about in this context is that, you know, advertisers increasingly don't want to advertise around news, even though it is, you know, has incredibly sort of deep relationships with audiences who are very engaged and who are very concerned. They're keyword blocking on the bits that are most sort of engaging and interesting and compelling for audiences, and that is a challenge for the industry. And I think you come back to you really come back to sort of first principles, which is what is it that we can offer advertisers in order to retain that sort of revenue stream, and it does come back to real relationships with an audience. You know, if we believe in the environments that we're investing in and creating, and we believe that audiences are coming to those environments, which they still are, in order to find things that they can't find elsewhere and that they trust, and therefore they have a really genuine, they're genuinely engaged and they have that relationship, that should in the end be valuable to advertisers. And can I just say I think the question about authenticity and individuals and the role of AI is a really fascinating one. And I think you see it with this whole brief excitement about the rise of AI influencers. And so, on one level, AI influencers, how exciting. They do what you tell them to do, you can pay them, there's this kind of wonderful transactional kind of relationship. But you've got to believe that that's a very short-term relationship, because after a while, how could you trust this person that's an AI influencer, given that they're being paid to tell you what they sort of apparently believe in? And so I think that kind of belief in authenticity and the belief in the need to trust is going to persist. And I think what you'll see is a sort of hype curve around kind of the role of AI and avatars and influencers. And then what you will come back is the importance of human opinion and authentic recommendation.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that. Yeah. Essentially, you're right. It is one of those words, authenticity, isn't it, that we bandy around a lot. And for good reason, because I think there's something that's at the heart of trust on that. And just echoing what I've been saying all morning about eyewitness journalism, going to the heart of the story. And I think nothing beats the authenticity of going into the Capitol when it's being stormed by Trump supporters, or sitting in somebody's flat when they're experiencing some terrible hardship, or equally doing an investigation where the presenter leads it, was Cathy Newman uncovering deep fake pornographic images of herself. Or it's one of our correspondents walking around with a politician in their constituency. And I suppose we're going to move more and more to authenticity, also meaning human-made, potentially. And so, yes, there's all sorts of cheap ways you can pop up an AI presenter, but that's not the same as eyewitness journalism. And so long as we can hold on to the value of that, I think, if anything, that might help us. But we have to be aware that people are making cost-effective news with avatars are quite good now, as we know, also using it in slightly more scary ways in a deep fake way. But I'm hoping that as long as we protect the system we've got, and by that I don't mean it in a sort of protectionist legacy media, I want to hold them to my business, I mean for the public who are our audiences, then hopefully we can hold on to the value of human-made even more in that sense.
Maybe before turning to you, Rosina, I'll just add two things on this. One is that I think we always need to keep in mind that from the point of view of the public, there's nothing particularly authentic about being amongst 1,000 journalists at a press conference, or having a sharply formulated opinion of 800 words twice a week, or having strong opinions on television all the time. This is not particularly authentic from the point of view of most people. And secondly, in terms of the content experience itself, essentially everyone younger than me may well have consumed more synthetic media content than conventional audiovisual content, because they play video games their whole lives. And I think that will shape how people think about value. And I'm not sure authenticity is the most useful way of thinking about really what creates value for people. Rosina, I want to turn to you last on this question about how we think about success rather than volume, but is there another way to think about success?
Yeah, I mean, for the Bureau, we think about what's our market differentiator, and it is absolutely impact. So we are mandated to drive real-world change through our journalism, and we do that in a number of ways. So in our commissioning doc, when the senior edit team look through or are asked to greenlight any investigation, we have a kind of very rigorous public interest test, and we have an impact paragraph, which is how are we going to sort of drive the change through this particular investigation. We report on impact to anybody who funds us. So in terms of foundations, that's a kind of really potent measure of success. Last year we delivered 100 investigations. These are the areas in which we delivered impact, including, a dozen mentioned in Parliament, for example. So there are ways that we can quantify it. We spent the last year developing an impact tracker. So impact is really typically hard to quantify. You can qualify it well and do a good narration, but we've spent a year, or rather our impact producer Lucy Nash has spent a year developing a tracker. So in our drop-down menu, you can look at where, anywhere around the world, what was our impact in terms of legislation, individual outcome, governance, corporate accountability. You can compartmentalize it into sort of specific niche reports or audience engagement. So I think having a sort of currency in that is really valuable to anybody who wants to support our work. Back to what are we for? We also used it to develop a product which is our second newsletter called The Spark. It's an impact-focused newsletter, and we spent quite a long time, I would say, mulling over, maybe arguing over solutions-focused journalism. I mean, we're an investigative newsroom. Nobody wanted to touch the word solutions. So, but our production editor came up with a newsletter which has an open rate of over 60% compared to a market average of under 30%, I think is doing really well. So there are a number of ways in which we can illustrate impact, whether that's through the sort of flow of money, whether that's sort of audience metrics. And ultimately, for the Bureau, it's about sustainability. You know, we're all here sort of figuring out sustainability. For us, I think impact is, one, it's a differentiator, and B, it brings in funding, and three, it kind of allows us different kind of routes into thinking about money. And I just sort of wanted to make a point about talent. I guess it's something that we think about a lot, but I would sort of, my tips would be, when we kind of bring in new talent, A, let them be themselves, and B, give them power. There's no point bringing in people if you're not going to kind of give them some commissioning, Welly, or kind of ways of navigating the platforms that maybe people of my generation don't understand.
Can I come in with a shameless plug about impact, just very quickly? I don't know if you'll have seen an article in The Guardian last week that said who's having the most impact on the election so far, and it was ITV. Partly it's news from everything through the investigations at Partygate, but also Mr Bates and the Post Office and the D-Day interview. So it's we didn't push that out, but it's nice to see that good journalism and good storytelling and being impartial can also have impact.
I think it's a wonderful note on which to end. Impact, sustainability, and pride in the work that journalists and publishers do. Thank you so much to our panel. Thank you so much to Nick, and thanks to our host of writers.
try and show us the final product in just a second. But as you say, the Liberal Democrats today saying they want to expand rural fuel duty relief to